Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it is an honor to stand before you today to discuss a leader who changed the course of history not just for his nation but for the world. Nelson Mandela was more than a political figure, he was a symbol of resilience, integrity, and leadership rooted in service. His life teaches us valuable lessons that transcend borders, industries, and challenges. Nelson Mandela's leadership was not accidental, it was deeply rooted in a clear and unwavering purpose. From an early age, he recognized the injustices of apartheid and made it his life's mission to fight for equality, justice, and freedom for all South Africans. His vision of a democratic and free society where people of all races could live in harmony was not just an abstract dream, it was a goal he pursued with relentless dedication. Purpose is the foundation of great leadership. Without it, leaders may find themselves lost, easily swayed by external pressures or short-term gains. Mandela's strong sense of purpose allowed him to endure the unimaginable -27 years in prison without losing hope or direction. While many would have succumbed to anger and bitterness, he used that time to reflect, learn, and strengthen his commitment to his cause. Leaders today must ask themselves, what is my purpose? Whether in politics, business, or community leadership, having a clear vision provides the motivation needed to navigate challenges. It ensures that decisions are not made out of fear or convenience, but out of a deep conviction to serve a greater good. Mandela's leadership teaches us that a well-defined purpose brings clarity, focus, and resilience. When a leader is committed to a cause greater than themselves, they inspire others to follow, not through force, but through vision and integrity. True leadership is not about personal ambition, but about working towards something that will outlive one's own time. A leader with purpose does not waver when faced with obstacles. They do not retreat in the face of opposition. Instead, they use setbacks as stepping stones, just as Mandela did. His sense of purpose was not just a guiding principle, it was his compass, his strength, and the driving force that made him one of the most revered leaders in history. So, if we want to lead like Mandela, we must first define our purpose. We must ask ourselves, what impact do we want to make? What legacy do we want to leave? And once we find that purpose, we must hold on to it, nurture it, and let it shape our actions every single day. One of the most remarkable qualities of Nelson Mandela's leadership was his ability to forgive. After spending 27 years in prison by the very government that oppressed his people, one might have expected him to emerge filled with resentment and a desire for revenge. Instead, he chose a different path, a path of reconciliation, unity, and healing. His ability to embrace forgiveness was not a sign of weakness, but a profound demonstration of strength, wisdom, and strategic leadership. Forgiveness, as Mandela showed, is not just about letting go of anger, it is about creating space for progress. When he was released from prison in 1990, South Africa was on the brink of a civil war. Hatred and division ran deep, and many of his supporters expected him to retaliate against the white minority that had upheld apartheid. Yet he understood that vengeance would only perpetuate the cycle of pain and suffering. Instead of fueling division, he extended a hand of reconciliation to those who once saw him as their enemy. His most symbolic act of forgiveness was his decision to meet with his former jailers and government officials, treating them with respect rather than hostility. One of the most powerful moments of his presidency came when he invited one of his former prison guards to attend his inauguration as a guest of honor. This act sent a clear message to the world. South Africa's future would not be built on revenge but on unity. Mandela's leadership teaches us that forgiveness is not forgetting the past but choosing not to let it control the future. He knew that holding on to anger and resentment would not build a new South Africa. Instead, he saw forgiveness as a tool for transformation, one that could bridge divides and lay the foundation for a peaceful and inclusive nation. This lesson is just as relevant today as it was during Mandela's time. Whether in leadership, business, or personal relationships, the ability to forgive can break down barriers, foster trust, and create an environment where people can move forward together. Leaders who embrace forgiveness inspire loyalty, promote healing, and open doors for dialogue and collaboration. Forgiveness also requires courage. It is often easier to hold grudges and remain trapped in a cycle of blame, but true leaders understand that progress demands a willingness to let go. Mandela once said, "Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. Holding on to past wrongs only harms the person carrying the burden." By choosing forgiveness, Mandela freed not only his country but also himself. In any leadership role, conflicts and injustices are inevitable. However, leaders must decide whether they will be consumed by past grievances or rise above them. Mandela showed the world that embracing forgiveness is a powerful strategy for building bridges, strengthening teams, and moving toward a brighter future. Nelson Mandela's life is a testament to the power of resilience, the ability to endure hardship, adapt to challenges, and emerge stronger. His 27-year imprisonment was not just a physical ordeal, it was a test of mental strength, patience, and unwavering commitment to his cause. Yet, despite the harsh conditions of Robben Island, despite being isolated from his loved ones and denied basic human rights, he never allowed adversity to break his spirit. Instead, he used his suffering as fuel to strengthen his vision and refine his leadership. Resilience is the defining trait of great leaders. Challenges are inevitable, setbacks are certain, and failures are part of the journey. But true leaders do not crumble under pressure, they rise above it. Mandela understood this deeply. He knew that the fight against apartheid would not be won overnight, that his personal sacrifices were necessary for the greater good, and that persons would ultimately triumph over oppression. While in prison, Mandela faced inhumane treatment. He was subjected to hard labor, confined to a small cell, and deprived of the simple comforts of life. He could have given up. He could have abandoned his cause. But instead of allowing despair to take hold, he focused on self-improvement and strategy. He read voraciously, debated with fellow prisoners, and transformed the prison into what he called the University of Robben Island, where inmates educated one another and prepared for the future. This ability to use even the harshest circumstances as an opportunity for growth is a lesson in resilience that all leaders can learn from. Resilience is not just about surviving hardship, it is about using adversity as a catalyst for change. When Mandela finally walked free in 1990, he did not return to a world that was ready to accept him with open arms. South Africa was still deeply divided, violence was rampant, and the road to democracy was filled with obstacles. Yet, he remained steadfast. He did not let anger dictate his actions. Instead, he maintained his focus, negotiated with former enemies, and patiently built the foundations of a new South Africa. In leadership, resilience is the difference between those who quit and those who make history. It is the quality that allows leaders to stay committed to their goals even when circumstances seem impossible. Mandela himself once said, "Do not judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again." This is a powerful reminder that setbacks do not define leaders. How they respond to those setbacks does. Every leader, whether in politics, business, or community service, will face moments of adversity. There will be failures, betrayals, and disappointments. But resilience means refusing to be defeated by those challenges. It means learning from mistakes, adapting to change, and continuing to push forward even when the odds are against you. Mandela's life teaches us that resilience is not just about endurance, it is about transformation. It is about using hardship as a stepping stone toward greatness. It is about maintaining hope even in the darkest moments and never losing sight of the bigger picture. True leaders, like Mandela, do not allow adversity to break them, they use it to build a stronger, wiser, and more determined version of themselves. One of Nelson Mandela's most defining traits as a leader was his profound humility and commitment to serving others. Despite being one of the most celebrated figures of the 20th century, he never sought personal glory, power, or wealth. Instead, he dedicated his life to the well being of his people, always placing their needs above his own. His leadership was not about status, but about service, and this approach remains a timeless lesson for leaders in every field. Humility in leadership is rare but essential. Many people who rise to positions of power become consumed by ego, believing that leadership is about exerting authority or being admired. Mandela rejected this mindset. Even after spending 27 years in prison, he did not emerge with a sense of entitlement or superiority. Instead, he maintained the same humility that had always defined him, treating everyone from world leaders to ordinary citizens with the same respect and kindness. A powerful example of Mandela's humility was his decision to serve only one term as president of South Africa, even though he could have remained in power for much longer. Unlike many leaders who cling to their positions, Mandela believed leadership was about service, not personal gain. By stepping down after just one term, he set an example of selflessness, showing the world that true leaders empower others rather than seeking to retain control. Humility also means being willing to listen and learn. Mandela never assumed he had all the answers. He surrounded himself with people of different perspectives, including former adversaries, and valued dialogue over dominance. When transitioning South Africa from apartheid to democracy, he consulted leaders across racial and political lines, ensuring that every voice was heard. This approach helped heal a divided nation and demonstrated that leadership is not about imposing one's will, but about fostering collaboration. Service was at the heart of everything Mandela did. His time in prison only deepened his commitment to helping others, and upon his release he dedicated himself to building a better South Africa. He fought not just for political freedom, but for social and economic justice, working tirelessly to improve education, healthcare, and opportunities for those who had been oppressed for decades. Even after retiring from politics, he continued his humanitarian work through the Nelson Mandela Foundation, focusing on issues such as HIV/AIDS awareness, poverty alleviation, and youth empowerment. His humility was also evident in the way he treated people on a personal level. Despite being a global icon, he never saw himself as superior to anyone. He took the time to engage with ordinary citizens, shaking hands with workers, visiting rural communities, and treating everyone with the same warmth and dignity. He never let his fame or position change the core of who he was, a humble servant of the people. Mandela's example challenges us to rethink leadership. It is not about power, prestige, or personal ambition. It is about service, sacrifice, and humility. A leader's true impact is measured not by how many people serve them, but by how many people they serve. Mandela showed that the best leaders are those who lead not from a pedestal, but from among the people, lifting others up, empowering them, and ensuring that leadership is always about collective progress, not individual success. One of Nelson Mandela's most defining qualities as a leader was his unwavering courage to stand for what was right, even when it meant facing extreme hardship, opposition, and personal sacrifice. He did not simply speak about justice, he lived it, fought for it, and was willing to suffer for it. His life is a testament to the idea that true leadership requires bravery, a deep sense of moral conviction, and the willingness to stand alone if necessary. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the ability to act in spite of it. Mandela faced some of the most powerful and oppressive forces in the world, yet he never allowed fear to dictate his actions. In the early years of his activism, he stood up against the apartheid regime, fully aware that doing so would make him a target. He organized protests, mobilized communities, and spoke out against injustice at a time when even questioning the government could lead to imprisonment or death. Yet, he refused to remain silent. He understood that change would never come without resistance, and he was willing to bear the consequences of his defiance. Perhaps the greatest symbol of his courage came during his 1964 trial, where he faced the death penalty for his role in opposing apartheid. Instead of pleading for mercy or denying his actions, he delivered his famous Rivonia trial speech, boldly declaring, "I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way. But I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I have taken a moment here to rest, to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance I have come. But I can only rest for a moment, for with freedom comes responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not ended." He knew that his words might seal his fate, but he stood firm in his beliefs. Instead of cowering, he used the trial as an opportunity to reaffirm his commitment to justice, even if it cost him his life. His courage was not just physical, it was moral. He chose to do what was right, not what was easy. Courage in leadership is essential, but it is often tested in difficult moments. Many leaders are willing to stand for justice when it is convenient, but few remain steadfast when they face real opposition. Mandela teaches us that courage is not about seeking conflict, but about refusing to compromise on one's principles. Even when he was imprisoned for 27 years, he never backed down. He understood that true courage is about long-term commitment, not temporary bravery. Even after his release from prison, his courage was tested again. He had every reason to be angry, every justification to seek revenge against those who had oppressed him and his people. But once again, he chose the harder path, the path of reconciliation. He was criticized by many, including his own supporters, for negotiating with the same government that had imprisoned him. But Mandela understood that courage is not just about fighting enemies, it is also about making peace when the time is right. He was willing to face criticism, to take risks, and to lead South Africa toward unity, even when others doubted him. Mandela's courage was not a single act, but a lifetime of fearless decisions. He demonstrated that true leadership requires standing up for justice, even when it is unpopular. It means being willing to sacrifice comfort, security, and personal gain for the greater good. His example challenges us all. Are we willing to stand up for what is right, even when it comes at a cost? Are we willing to take difficult stands, even when we stand alone? The world needs more leaders like Mandela, leaders who do not simply go along with the status quo but who challenge it. Leaders who do not bend under pressure but who rise above it. Leaders who have the courage to fight for justice, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. One of Nelson Mandela's greatest leadership qualities was his extraordinary ability to unite people, even those who once considered themselves enemies. In a world where divisions, whether political, racial, or ideological, often lead to conflict, Mandela demonstrated that true leadership is about building bridges, not walls. He understood that a nation, an organization, or even a family cannot thrive when it is torn apart by hatred, mistrust, and division. Instead, he dedicated his life to healing the wounds of the past and bringing people together under a shared vision. South Africa, under apartheid, was a country deeply fractured by institutionalized racism, economic disparity, and decades of violent oppression. The logical expectation was that, once Mandela was released and took power, he would seek vengeance against the white minority that had upheld apartheid. Many of his supporters demanded retribution, believing that the only way to balance the scales of justice was through punishment. However, Mandela knew that revenge would only continue the cycle of hatred. Instead, he chose the much harder path, reconciliation. His ability to unite was not just based on words but on action. At the time, rugby was largely seen as a sport of the white Afrikaner minority, and the national team, the Springboks, was a symbol of the apartheid regime. Many black South Africans despised the team, seeing it as a representation of their former oppressors. But Mandela saw an opportunity to bring the nation together. Instead of rejecting the Springboks, he embraced them. He wore their jersey, attended their matches, and publicly supported them, showing that they were not just a team for one racial group, but for all South Africans. When South Africa won the World Cup, the sight of Mandela handing the trophy to the team captain, Francois Pienaar, became one of the most powerful images of unity in modern history. It sent a clear message: the future of South Africa would not be built on division, but on inclusion and mutual respect. This approach to leadership extended beyond sports. As president, Mandela worked tirelessly to ensure that his government represented all South Africans, not just the black majority. He appointed former political opponents to key positions, proving that reconciliation was not just a symbolic gesture, but a real commitment. He knew that unity required more than just rhetoric. It required action, compromise, and the willingness to listen to opposing views. Unifying people does not mean ignoring differences. Mandela never pretended that racial and social divisions did not exist. Instead, he addressed them head-on, acknowledging the pain of the past while guiding people toward a common goal. He understood that unity does not mean uniformity, it means finding shared purpose despite differences. In leadership, whether in politics, business, or community service, division is often the easier route. It is easy to rally people by focusing on what separates them rather than what unites them. Many leaders use fear, anger, or resentment as tools to gain power. But Mandela showed that real leadership is about bringing people together, even when it is difficult. His leadership challenges us all. Are we fostering unity? Or are we deepening divisions? Are we willing to listen to those with whom we disagree? Are we brave enough to extend a hand to those we once considered adversaries? Mandela teaches us that the strength of a leader is not in their ability to dominate, but in their ability to unify. He showed that peace is not achieved through exclusion, but through inclusion. He demonstrated that real change happens not when people are separated, but when they come together under a common vision. Nelson Mandela's leadership was not built on empty words or grimaces, it was built on action. He understood that true leaders do not just tell people what to do, they show them by doing it themselves. He lived his principles every day, demonstrating integrity, discipline, and self-sacrifice. His ability to lead by example inspired millions, proving that leadership is not about commanding respect, but about earning it through actions. From the very beginning of his fight against apartheid, Mandela set the standard for courage and commitment. He did not lead from a place of comfort or safety, he was on the front lines. When he called for defiance against unjust laws, he was the first to challenge them publicly. When he urged others to endure hardships for the sake of justice, he showed them how by willingly enduring imprisonment, physical labor, and separation from his family. He never asked anyone to make sacrifices he was not willing to make himself. One of the most striking aspects of Mandela's leadership was his personal discipline. Even during his 27 years in prison, he maintained a rigorous daily routine, waking up early to exercise, reading extensively, and engaging in intellectual discussions with fellow inmates. He did not allow the harsh conditions of prison to weaken his resolve or diminish his sense of purpose. Instead, he used that time to strengthen his mind and prepare for the leadership role he knew he would one day assume. His ability to lead by example became even more evident after his release from prison. Instead of emerging as a bitter man seeking revenge, he showed restraint, wisdom, and forgiveness. He demonstrated through his actions that reconciliation was possible, even after decades of oppression. This was not just rhetoric. He personally reached out to former enemies, treated them with dignity, and invited them to be part of the new South Africa. He understood that if he wanted to build a unified nation, he had to embody the very qualities he wished to see in others. Mandela also led by example in his humility. Despite becoming one of the most revered figures in history, he never acted as though he was above anyone else. He continued to treat people with kindness and respect, whether they were world leaders or ordinary citizens. He never used his position to accumulate personal wealth or extend his power. In fact, one of his most remarkable decisions was stepping down after one term as president, a move that set a powerful precedent in Africa, where many leaders cling to power for decades. By willingly leaving office, he showed that leadership is about service, not personal ambition. Leading by example also means taking responsibility. Mandela never blamed others when things went wrong. He took accountability for his decisions and actions. He understood that leadership requires making difficult choices and accepting the consequences. Even when his decisions were unpopular, he stood by them because he believed they were right. His leadership teaches us an essential lesson. If you want people to follow you, give them a reason to. Be the person you want them to be. Act with integrity, show resilience in tough times, and treat others with respect. Leadership is not about demanding loyalty, it is about inspiring it through consistent, honorable actions. Mandela's legacy reminds us that the best leaders do not just talk about change, they embody it. They set the standard, walk the path, and prove through their own actions what is possible. If we wish to lead like Mandela, we must not only speak about our values but live them every single day. Nelson Mandela's life and leadership offer timeless lessons for anyone who aspires to make a meaningful impact. His ability to forgive, his resilience in the face of adversity, his humility, his courage, and his commitment to unity set him apart as one of the greatest leaders in history. But perhaps his most important lesson is that leadership is not about power, it is about service. Mandela showed us that true leadership is not measured by titles, wealth, or influence, but by the ability to inspire others, to bring people together, and to create lasting change. His journey was not easy, and his leadership required immense sacrifice. Yet through his actions he proved that even in the darkest of times, hope, integrity, and unwavering determination can build a better future. The question we must ask ourselves is, how can we apply these lessons in our own lives? Whether in politics, business, or our communities, we all have the opportunity to lead like Mandela, not by seeking personal gain, but by standing for what is right, lifting others up, and being the example we wish to see in the world. The world still needs leaders like Nelson Mandela. And the truth is, we can all be those leaders if we choose to lead with courage, wisdom, and an unshakable commitment to justice.